more sacrifices. What are these for? Dravya yajna, the sacrifice of wealth. So what is the offering? See, dravya yajna means you offer, in those days they used to offer grain, which means wealth. So when you write out a check or you give cash, money to another individual, what happens? The offering is your wealth. So your wealth diminishes and the recipient's wealth is enhanced. Yajna is going on. There is an offering and there is a kindling. So when you give charity to somebody, when you do dana to somebody, you should not do it with the attitude that you are doing a great favor to the person who's receiving the dana. You should do it with the attitude that here is a yajna going on, here is a sacrifice going on. You remind yourself of Atman. The second, this is in order of superiority. So dravya yajna, the sacrifice of wealth, is the lowest, and later on we'll see why he says that. The higher yajna to this sacrifice is tapo yajna. Tapo yajna is where you offer your physical comfort, your physical, mental and intellectual energies are offered for the welfare of the other individual. So what are you offering? You're offering your comfort, and what is being kindled? The recipient's comfort is enhanced. Tapas is you go through hardship. For instance, see, if there is a person who needs to be hospitalized and there is a very expensive surgery that needs to be done, you can write out a check to help with the expenses. That's one way of helping the individual. But you can also help by way of tapas, which means you go there, you help the person fill up the forms, you help with the admission procedures, you help identify a doctor, a surgeon, you go and talk to the doctor, the surgeon, make sure that he's the right surgeon. And all this effort you put in, this is much better than just giving money. It's of far greater value. So therefore, he says, tapo yajna is one step higher than dravya yajna. The third means yajna number 8, is yoga yajna, spiritual practice. When you understand that people in the world are suffering, and suffering unnecessarily because they just don't know how to handle themselves, how to handle their mind, how to handle their desires and their ego. They have no assessment of what the world is, and they have completely unrealistic expectations of what the world can do for them. They want happiness, they don't know where happiness resides, and they go all over the world looking for happiness. So what people essentially need, when you get to the bottom of it, is they neither need wealth nor do they need your comfort. What they need is knowledge. Yoga yajna. So when you offer your mind and intellect, you offer your knowledge that is far more valuable. Today we are in the age of knowledge capital. It's the person with the knowledge who calls the shots, because people have come to understand that knowledge is far more valuable than wealth. So in yoga yajna, what do? You offer your mind and intellect. What is kindled is the recipient's spiritual development. And that is of far greater value than either dravya yajna or tapo yajna. So these three and the hierarchy you understand. The last one is a googly. He says, the highest form of giving is svadhyaya jnana yajna. Svadhyaya jnana yajna means you don't go about doing anything for anybody. You sit in your room, you study, you battle with yourself and do what you can to evolve spiritually. Svadhyaya jnana yajna. In this, what are you offering? The offering is your ignorance, and what is kindled is your spiritual level. Knowledge of the self is being kindled. This is the hierarchy. Therefore, when you understand that you need to do service, you need to do something for people, How do you do it is the question. What do you do? The highest form of giving is svadhyaya jnana yajna. But this doesn't mean that you don't do the lower ones. The other day, when we discussed this in Bombay, one lady immediately after the lecture came to me and said, "Thank you very much. You've really given me a source of direction." And she went on and on and on, and we also get carried away. So for a moment, I also felt good, okay, this lady has benefited. Then she deflated me completely. She said, all this time, I didn't feel like doing any charity. I have not done any charity in my life. And just yesterday I was thinking that every month I should do something for a higher cause, that I should give a check to somebody, some institution. Today you said it right. Now I've decided not to do any charity. I said, why? Because you only said svadhyaya jnana is the highest. It's not that you should not do the lower ones. What it means is you don't stop giving only with wealth. You give wealth. You give tapoyajna, you give your hard work and effort. You give knowledge, yoga yajna, and you do svadhyaya jnana yajna. So a person who is at the level of svadhyaya jnana yajna automatically does all others. In fact, does more. So this is it. Yajna number 6, dravya yajna, wealth. Number 7, tapo yajna, you give your hard work, effort. Number 8, yoga yajna, you give knowledge that will help relieve the suffering, mental torture that people are going through. But the highest form of giving is where you do svadhyaya jnana. Why is it so? Because at this level, when you uncover or discover Atman, what you will give is Atman. And therefore it's most valuable. Verse 29.
Apane jubhati pranam, prane panam tatha pare, pranapana gatirudva, pranayama parayanaha.
Still others offer as sacrifice prana, inhalation, into apana, exhalation, and apana into prana. Having controlled the flow of prana and apana, some are absorbed in pranayama, breath control. In verses 26, 27 and 28, he has covered receipts. You remember the first is the yajna of sense perception. Then reaction at the level of the mind and intellect, what kind of reaction takes place. And 28 responses, action. The only action that Krishna, Vyasa, the Gita recognizes is unselfish, selfless action. That means all the actions that we are performing, selfish action is completely out of their radar, doesn't exist. It's not worth talking about. So, receipts, reactions and responses are now what he does, what he's talking about is, the receipt is again redeployed, given back to responses. So, inhalation is the receipt, exhalation is the response. He's not just talking about inhalation and exhalation. He's talking about all intake. Philosophically, there is intake at every level. There is the food that you eat, food for all the senses, color and form for the eyes, sound for the ears, taste for the tongue, touch for the skin, etc. There is intake of emotions. You take in emotions from the world and you're exposed to ideas of the world. So there is intake at all three levels, physical, emotional and intellectual. And there is output. Action at the level of the body. You give out emotions back into the world and you give out thoughts. So what he's saying here is, you can't have one without the other. Both need to be balanced. And in breathing, it is under normal circumstances, automatically balanced. So without your knowing it, you're breathing in, inhaling, and you're exhaling. So every time you take in a breath, you think of that divine power that is enabling this activity to take place. What a beautiful idea. This is how you can do worship 24/7. Every moment of your life you're breathing there. You can't escape breathing. And therefore you can't escape the thought of God. What a wonderful way of reminding us of God. Every time and that gives you a relief. In India, you end up waiting for something or the other all the time. If you're caught in traffic, instead of fretting and fuming, sit there, you're breathing anyway. Every time you take in a breath and every time you let out a breath, think of that divine power which facilitates this breathing. Just think about it. We're breathing every moment of our lives, but what a wonderful machinery it is. What a perfect piece of creation where you take in breath effortlessly, but the frenetic activity that goes on in your lungs for the exchange of gases, perfectly done, is so beautiful. And by the time you exhale back, your system is cleansed of the impure carbon dioxide and is rejuvenated with pure oxygen. Those whose lungs are not functioning, they need to go on the respirator, and oh God, what a horrible thing it is. The fact that it is getting done without any problem from the moment you're born till the moment you die, isn't it a marvel? And yet you sit there and say, oh, I'm depressed, I'm low, I'm out of sorts. How can you be out of sorts? How can you be depressed when there are such miracles splashed in life? This is just one example. Every moment of your life you see miracles taking place in the world. You don't have the eyes to see. You don't have the perception. So if you're depressed, you must be really in a bad state. Shift your attention. Anybody who's depressed is depressed because he's constantly thinking of himself. How will you not be depressed? Have you taken a look at yourself in the mirror? If you look at yourself 24 hours a day, how will you not be depressed? Even you will get depressed. What about the rest of us? That's why Swami Ramatirtha said, your basic fundamental obligation to the world is that you should be cheerful. If you're down and out, if you're miserable, if you're depressed, this is the greatest, the most infectious disease that you have. You lock yourself in a room and don't get out. Don't spread that infection. The problem is all of us are depressed. So this intake and output. Now what happens is, the next yajna that he speaks of is pranayama, which is regulation of breath. When your mind is agitated, you automatically tend to take shorter breaths, shallower breaths, and they're fast. Have you noticed it? As the mind becomes tranquil and calm, the breathing becomes deeper and longer, the whole system gets more efficient. And this is pranayama. So, with the control of the mind, as the mind gets calmer, as with every breath, as you think of that divine power that facilitates the breath, your mind becomes calm, gets freed of all the shackles and agitations of the world, and your breathing becomes more regulated, it becomes deeper and longer. That is pranayama. But the way we are going about it is all ulta, reverse. With an agitated mind, we try and control the breathing. So we sit there. That pranayama itself is such a struggle. It should come naturally. It comes naturally when the mind becomes calm. And to help the mind become calm, you actually practice pranayama. It helps. But unless you make a concerted effort to calm the mind, however much pranayama you do, it's like water off a duck's back. It doesn't help. It helps temporarily. That's it. So inner strength you get when you practice pranayama. As the mind becomes calmer and your physiological functions, not just breathing, your physiological functions get regulated, you are able to regulate with your intellect all intake, physical, emotional and intellectual, and you regulate the output. It's very important that you do that because you're exposed to so much of junk at all three levels. You're exposed to junk food, and if you keep intake of junk food, you'll end up like junkyard. Emotions also. Negative emotions are rampant all over the place. Therefore, you need to protect your system from the negative emotions. Even if you're not exposed to negative emotions, you are a factory churning out negative emotions. Thoughts. What kind of thoughts are you exposing yourself to? What kind of thoughts are you giving out to the world? Once you regulate all this, you gain inner strength. So this is the next one. So yajna number 10 is breath, where what you are offering is prana and apana, inhalation and exhalation, and what is being kindled is the other. When you offer prana, apana is kindled. When you offer apana, prana is kindled. And thus this 10th yajna goes on. That 11th yajna is the inner strength that you gain when you regulate all intake and output. So the offering is regulated prana and apana, regulated intake and output, and what is kindled is pranayama. The inner strength is kindled. Excessive or inadequate intake or output depletes you of inner strength. So it has to be just right. What Buddha referred to as the middle path, neither too much nor too little. In the 6th chapter where he speaks of the yoga of meditation, before he describes meditation, he says, meditation is not for a person who eats too much or eats too little, acts too much or does not act at all, sleeps too much or does not sleep at all. He goes to almost absurd things explaining all this because we tend to do things in excess. We vacillate between two extremes. So the middle path, if you do, it generates a lot of energy. And with this internal energy, what do you do? The last yajna is external activity. You plow it back into external activity where you become dynamic, strong, potent actions, and you gain success in the world. Verse 30.
अपरे नियताहाराः प्राणान् प्राणेषु जुह्वति सर्वेऽप्येते यज्ञविदः यज्ञक्षपितकल्मषाः.
Others of disciplined diet offer pranas, vital air, into pranas. All these are knowers of yajna, sacrifice, having destroyed their sins by yajna. So here he describes the 12th and last yajna, which is external activity. So this internal strength that you have got by the regulation of intake and output, you plow that back into external activity. So the offering is your inner strength and the kindling is external activity. It is so true. If you lead a life of regulation, regulation is not self-denial. Regulation is not frustration. It's a balanced life. When you take every aspect into consideration and balance everything, your physical activity, your exercise, your intellectual input, your study first thing in the morning, spiritual study, positive emotional environment, etc., you feel so full of beans, you feel so energetic, you feel so cheerful, and you're all set for activity. And that activity that you perform with so much cheer and joy and enthusiasm that you spread this cheer and enthusiasm around and you create a team of highly motivated people. So here is this external activities. So the 12 yajnas which he has shown from verse 25 to 30 together show how you can convert every single activity, every single transaction into worship. Sarve ete yajna vidaha. All these are knowers of sacrifice. So worship means much more than just mechanical performance of rituals, mechanically going to a temple, church or mosque, mechanically following certain path. Whatever you do, if you do it with your heart and soul, it becomes worship. This is what we need to learn from Westerners. If they do anything, they do give 100% of their personality and they do it. Otherwise, they don't do it. Here we are neither here nor there. One foot in, one foot out. And therefore, we don't achieve much. Whatever it is that you do, now that you have embarked upon this study of the Gita, at least for these 6 days, give it your best. Otherwise, don't participate. Forget the study of the Gita. There are people who don't give of themselves to each other. In a family, you find, the other day in Bombay, somebody was complaining. The husband was complaining, my wife is never there with me. I said, what do you mean never there with you? She's all the time with you. He says, yes, she's there all the time, but her mind is elsewhere all the time. And he actually counted. He says, if she spends 2 hours with me, 1 hour and 55 minutes she's on the cell phone with somebody else. Same thing with children. So it's not your physically being there with the family member that matters, it's being there, all of you. What's the point if you're there and your mind is somewhere else? The mind and the body should never be disconnected. Then you end up divorced within yourself. Whatever it is that you're doing physically, the mind should be behind it. Similarly with worship. Same with worship. Here we are, the other day in UK, somebody was saying, there was a puja going on and a lot of Britishers were invited to that puja. And they found, the lady there, the chief guest told me, it's amazing. When we do worship, there is a prayer in church, there is absolute silence. Nobody speaks. Says here the puja is going on, there's music going on, and the people are chatting, and it doesn't make sense. So worship is not mechanical adherence. Worship is doing whatever it is that you're doing with a worshipful attitude. Then you worship 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Your mind is anchored in the higher. And the law is, as you think, so you become that Atman. Once you become Atman, the fluctuations of the world no longer affect you. And you become the king of kings, you become a master. You then control the world instead of the world controlling you. So maintain this thought of the higher as often as possible. We understand that it is not possible to suddenly shift your attention and constantly think of Atman, but at least once in a while, remind yourself. As you breathe, remind yourself. When you're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, remind yourself. When you're transacting emotionally, remind yourself. Every thought that crosses your intellect, remind yourself. And then you find that you're a totally different person. Next verse. 31.
Yajna yanti brahma sanātanam nāyam lokostya yajñasya putonya kuru sattama.
First thing is, you enjoy the very activity. Any action that is dedicated to a higher cause is something that you enjoy to the fullest. And you find fulfillment in the very performance of the action. You're not looking for appreciation from anybody. You're not looking for a reward from the world. Because you're self-sufficient, you have dedicated this action to the goal of self-development, self-realization. And as long as you are performing that action to the best of your ability, dedicatedly, you are confident that the result that you are working for will happen. Never mind whether the world appreciates it or not. The second, actually you will gain success. Anybody who performs actions dedicated